continue for retired lawyers to continue to use their skills and engage in pro bono work that, we didn't have the time or opportunity to do during our busy practices. And that was certainly true for me. I was looking for opportunities and we thought, I could tell my story such as it is with respect to getting involved in this work with Permit Power and the Berkeley Law Environmental Clinic, just to make it a little bit more concrete because we talk a lot in our group about pro bono opportunities and we've had some success with, hooking up people or helping to coordinate, a meeting of the minds and people finding opportunities that make sense for them. And we thought we'd elaborate a little bit on that while at the same time learning about the great work that Permit Power is doing and the great and important work that Permit Power is doing. So, to sort of tee that up a little bit, we were having some discussions early on in the coordinating committee, Third Act Lawyers, and somebody came up with the idea, gee, wouldn't it be great if we could pair retired lawyers somehow with law students in a sort of cross-generational approach to working on the battle against climate change or one of our democracy-related issues. And at about that time, sort of by happy coincidence, we became aware of an opportunity at the Berkeley Law's Environmental Clinic. Um, we learned that the clinic was in early stages of project planning with what was then a newly minted advocacy group called Permit Power. And we had some initial discussions with Permit Power and the clinic's director, Claudia Polsky, and a collaboration was born. So there are various ways that these collaborations can work with clinics working with not only staff of the clinic, the students of the clinic, not only working with the clinic staff, but also with lawyers. Sometimes they're adjunct professors, sometimes they're just volunteers from the legal community. In this case, we were pretty structured in the way that we approached it. We entered into, we had the good fortune of having a specific client that would be the focus of our work for the semester. And so I entered into an engagement letter with Permit Power, so they were my client. The clinic did so as well. And then we actually had a written co-counsel agreement between myself and the clinic. So, we worked through all of that and formalized it in a way that all parties were comfortable. And it was actually kind of a learning experience for the students as well to see how all this was structured. So we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of the engagement, of course, but I just wanted to say at the outset, what a great experience this was. It really met all of my expectations in terms of how rewarding it was to get with these young people and do something productive in the sphere of environmental law. We had, they were amazing students. They all had their own unique backgrounds. We had a student from Saudi Arabia. We had one from Italy. They were very interesting and highly motivated and capable. And I got to say, I feel like I learned as much from the experience as they did, if not more. Um, so one thing that was good about the clinic setting was, I had the opportunity to play like a dual role as co-counsel. So there was sort of the classroom teaching piece where I could talk about civil procedure and some of the nuances of California law in a sort of a classroom setting. But most of the time, it was working with students and the clinic coordinator, basically as colleagues, working on a team, developing and implementing our legal enforcement strategy. And so, big picture briefly, and Matt and Ben from Permit Power will get into a bit more about what the substance of this was. But we were dealing with a statute that was newly enacted, sorry, that was newly enacted And it requires every jurisdiction, city and county in California to adopt automated permitting for residential solar and storage. And there was a statutory deadline of September 2023 for that, and many jurisdictions were not in compliance with that deadline. So our task was to get them to comply, as many of them as we could. So we developed a strategy that involved engaging with the jurisdictions and negotiating with them on the one hand, and also developing a litigation-based strategy, which could come into play if negotiations failed. Um, so turning to the project itself, so Permit Power, as I mentioned, was a newly formed advocacy group at the time, and they were instrumental in getting this legislation passed in California requiring automated permitting for residential solar and storage. By way of introduction, we're fortunate to have Permit Power's co-founder and chief of policy, Ben Davis, with us here today, along with Matt Kirby, Permit Power's campaign director. Ben and Matt can fill us in on Permit Power's mission and vision generally, and give us some of the specifics about the California legislation and the campaigns they are running elsewhere. At the clinic, we also worked with Permit Power's other co-founder, Nick Josefowitz. They were all generous with their time and were incredibly responsive and flexible working with us in the clinic setting. So by way of further introduction, Ben Davis is the Chief of Policy of Permit Power. Ben is a policy analyst and campaign manager with 15 years experience tackling the United States' biggest environmental and social challenges. Since beginning to work exclusively on solar policy in 2019, he has led campaigns to pass a series of pro-solar bills through the California legislature, update California's standards for new commercial construction to create a strong solar and storage mandate, and revamp the residential building code to allow for larger solar batteries. Previously, he orchestrated a successful nationwide social movement to shut down for-profit prisons and oversee a 50-state campaign to make state governments more transparent. Also joining us is Matt Kirby, who currently works as the campaign director at Permit Power. He's a campaigner with a track record of advocacy successes at the federal, state, and local level. Previously, he built and ran a program at the National Park Conservation Association to protect the land surrounding parks from energy development. Matt spent the early part of his career as a federal policy expert and lobbyist at the Sierra Club, leading campaigns to protect special landscapes and helping secure permanent protections for millions of acres of public lands. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt and Ben.
Great, thank you, Will. Ben, I think can you move the slide forward a little bit? Yeah, so thanks again for having us. We're really excited to be here today and talk to everyone about this campaign and the work we've been doing. The work we've been doing with Will to sort of get things off the ground. So again, I'm Matt Kirby. I'm the campaign director at Permit Power. I live in Colorado, but we work in states. Our whole team works in states across the country to pass new state policy aimed at making it as cheap and easy for homeowners to go solar and power their lives with clean energy. And we focus on that by cutting barriers to permitting, right? Since permitting is one of those soft costs, that's really what makes residential solar so expensive. Ben, I can go to that first slide, sorry. Looking here at some of our sort of peer countries and what the cost is per watt of hour, the price of solar panels is about the same globally, and it's really only a small chunk of the actual sticker price of any install, but it's the soft costs, it's the red tape, it's all those permitting costs that build up and layer on each other that makes solar 7 to 8 times more expensive here in the United States than in many of those peer countries, and really keeps the average solar system out of reach for many ordinary Americans. You can go forward, Ben, one more time. Because this is what we're looking at. This is residential solar adoption here. And you can see we are at the bottom of the barrel because of those high costs. And that is a large part of the reason we've really only tapped a small amount of our rooftop potential. And I think given everything that's going on, the federal government right now and the attacks on utility scale renewable energy, we need to be doing everything we can to unlock more residential solar. And we sort of think that we have a template to help fill that gap. Next slide, Ben. Okay, so there's a whole suite of policy reforms that we could talk about forever that our organization that we endorse and we're hoping to work on in the future at the state level. But what we want to talk about today is just one of those policies. It's what Will mentioned, and it's one that we're laser focused on right now, and that is instant permitting. Instant permitting, it's sometimes called automated permitting. It simply means that a jurisdiction which provides permits, be it your county or your city or whoever you need to get your permit from to put solar on your roof, they must have an online automated platform that instantly provides permits for systems that are code compliant. That's it. It's pretty simple, and it's one of the most cost-effective reforms out there in terms of actually, again, lowering costs of a typical solar install. So the general process here is that a contractor submits a solar permit application through an online digital platform. And then that system checks it against local building codes, electrical standards, fire safety regulations. And if everything matches the criteria, the permit is automatically approved and issued. If it doesn't, it automatically spits it back. Here are the changes you need to make, changes, boom, permit approved and issued. There are several technologies that are already out there, easily available on the market to automate permitting. The first, and this is sort of the gold standard, that's Solar App. It was jointly developed by the Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Lab. It's currently operated as a non-for-profit with a licensing agreement from the National Renewable Energy Lab. Another option out there, there's a private company, a private technology company called Symbium. Both of the platforms, they're free for jurisdictions to adopt. They're easy. They have extensive support and onboarding for jurisdictions to actually integrate the software. And those are just sort of the two main existing platforms out there. But a lot of jurisdictions that have actually automated their processes have built their own custom platforms, or they just give permits instantly using their existing GovTech software. In the vast majority of cases, it is a fairly simple process for jurisdictions to actually automate their processes. And these platforms, the readily available platforms, work for the vast majority of project installations that we see. And then the last thing I'll just say on this slide is that automated permitting has already been adopted by more than 300 jurisdictions across the country. That covers about a third of the current solar install market. Two states, California and Maryland, we'll be talking much more about California here in a minute, have passed legislation requiring jurisdictions to automate their processes, and another half dozen states or so are considering similar measures this session as we speak. So yeah, now we can go to the next slide, Ben. I just want to talk about the benefits here briefly. The benefits are enormous. Estimates show that it's really the sort of overly complex permitting processes that add about $6,000 to $7,000 to the cost of an average solar system in the US, right? And that is largely because each permit issuing jurisdiction has its own bespoke process, its bespoke set of requirements as to how to actually get the permit. Do you have to go in person? Do you have to go in person on a Tuesday or a Thursday? Can it be emailed? And being able to sort of navigate across all these different localities from even if they're 1 mile apart, that puts a ton of resources on the installer, and then those costs are then passed on to consumers. And it's also these sort of overly complicated processes that add hefty delay times. I think many of us who have had solar panels understand what that delay means. And those delays are the number one reason that customers cancel projects in process, right? So any installer, again, that's working across one state has to take all these timelines, even if it only takes 1 day to get a permit in your city, but it takes 6.5 weeks to get it one city over. An installer has to account for all of those timelines in their business plan and know how to work across all of those different localities, right? So that keeps the costs high for everyone in a state. Which is why we're really interested in looking at this as a state policy, right? This is not a jurisdiction by jurisdiction policy. This is a state policy to create a statewide minimum standard, and that standard is instant. We've seen this work across the country. I will say it's no surprise that I think when you bring costs down, when you shorten timelines, you increase solar deployment. You're increasing clean energy deployment. We've seen this act out in the real world. For example, in Arizona, the city of Tucson and Pima County both voluntarily automated their processes. And suddenly you had this area of like permitting standardization that created market transformation. And that's really what we're looking at. And we saw solar deployment skyrocket within those two jurisdictions. Solar grew at twice the rate as it did in the rest of the state, right? So we have a real world example that this works. Next slide, Ben. So that's what instant permitting is, why it's useful. Just want to give you a little more context about the campaign that we've been running with Will, but we're trying to get more instant permitting across the country right now, right? Our theory of change is pretty simple. 85% of the market is in 16 states. And so the universe of states we need to target is very limited. Ultimately, again, we're looking for that market transformation to bring costs down. And that is going to happen once we reach critical mass. So we already have the two states where this is mandated, California and Maryland. Hopefully, we're going to get a few more this ledge session, which we can talk more about, a few more next ledge session. And pretty soon, this policy, it's no longer controversial. More and more jurisdictions see how easy it is. It snowballs and it really becomes the norm. I will also say this is a really bipartisan template we're having here, and we're hoping to make it more so this session. I'll talk more about the states we're actually engaged in a moment, but we have models that work in red states, in blue states, and purple states. Even though the only two states that have passed it today, California and Maryland, are obviously deep blue states, but those were both bipartisan bills. And right now, in this moment, I think cutting red tape, cutting costs is a bipartisan issue that is really, we are seeing give us a lot of traction in some of these deep red places like Texas and Arizona. And then the final thing I'll say here is that implementation is key, right? And that is what we are going to be talking more about, what we've done so much work with Will. I think it's a strange, sad fact that as part of this campaign, we need to build in an implementation because jurisdictions don't always follow the law. So it is incumbent on us, if we want to make this successful, to actually bird dog the jurisdictions to comply. Next slide, Ben. So we basically have, I just want to talk about four sort of policy options that we're pushing in states right now. The first, it sort of depends on the politics of the state. The first two, these are sort of our blue state policies. The first one, this is the version that passed in California and Maryland. It's simply requiring that local governments, jurisdictions automate their processes. Pretty simple. The second one is sort of a version of that, but it's to require a state agency to offer a platform that jurisdictions can tap into, they can use for the permitting review process. But both of those are sort of mandate bills. We don't like to say mandate, but those are the mandate bills. The third, this is our red state version. And basically this allows a qualified third party to do the proper review and issuance of a permit for a project install. So a version of this actually already passed a couple weeks ago in Florida. We are still waiting on a governor's signature here, and we're very close in Texas. Just today, we got a second vote out of the full House here for the full Texas. We're still working on some potential amendments, but what's important is that both of those states already had third-party permitting structures in place, right? You had already had Republican legislatures take some of the permitting authority away from existing jurisdictions to do their permitting. So we were not creating a new structure, but rather we were adding on to it, right? The fourth version, though, I want to say this is sort of our purple state version, and it was a mashup between the two. Either way, a jurisdiction can automate their process, or if they didn't want to, then they would need to allow the use of a third party. This is the version we were running in Arizona. It's not currently that version, but it could come back as a template if we need to. Okay, Ben. Next slide.
Matt, are you seeing some of the questions in the chat?
I'm not referencing those right now. We can come to that though when I'm done. Let me just wrap up this if we need to.
Great.
I mean, if we want to do questions as we go, we can do that. I sort of thought, we were going to save questions until the end, but if you want to go as we can.
Yeah,
That's
I'm actually fine either way. Are there any specific questions that sort of relate to the content here that
I
Yeah,
think there are, this Mark, I think there are some specific, what they're about instant permitting. So maybe we can hit those now when before we move on to, or you want to finish up with instant permitting, Matt, and then
Yeah,
we'll,
how about yeah, this is the last slide of my section. So how about I'll just touch on
yeah,
this. This will take 30 seconds and then we can turn
and
to the
very
questions.
good.
and Matt, spend an extra minute on New York because that's one of the questions in the chat. If you'd be so kind.
You're gonna have to read me that question. But so this is though just to show you the universe of states we're looking at here. This is where we still have live legislative efforts. Arizona, which I just talked about. Massachusetts, Massachusetts is a 2-year session, so it's actually only getting started, and will really heat up next year. Illinois, New Jersey, New York, and Texas. Now, not on this list are 3 states where legislation didn't make it this year, but where we tried, Colorado, Minnesota, and Hawaii. And then 1 state where we did make it, which was Florida, right? So hopefully within a couple weeks here, we will have a handful, 3 to 4 potentially new states here where we're actually going to be talking about pivoting to an implementation campaign. Okay, so let me look at these questions here. What was the New York question?
Just what's the status in New York, but generally?
Ben, you might know better than New York is sort of a that's covered by our colleague Hannah. It's sort of a hot mess. It's my general.
The bill cleared the first policy committee in the assembly. No, sorry, in the Senate for the first policy committee in the assembly. Like yesterday, the chair of that committee had a bunch of questions. We got back to her. I think it's her decision now. We're down to the wire. I think honestly, the prospects of the bill passing in New York, at least this session, are not super high.
Ben, is that a straight mandate in New York?
Yeah, it's similar to the California bill.
Uh-huh.
Got a couple other questions that are sort of just asking about the sort of the forces you're up against. Pat raises the question about, who has a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. We have another question from Ellen Partridge about, are there reasons for having particularized reviews? So are there reasons from a policy standpoint that people just have trouble with automating a process that they think should be particularized? Or are there other forces like the fossil fuel industry or places that are just fighting this because it's gonna be good for solar, which is bad for them? So can you comment a little bit just on the forces you're up against? What are the headwinds that you're facing?
I will start briefly, and Ben, feel free to jump in. It's not fossil fuel interests here, right? I think residential solar is not something that they've been fighting. Honestly, our biggest opponent here are local permitting authorities, who frankly view any sort of mandate as a preemption of local authority. That's frankly why our bill died in Colorado. You had a number of jurisdictions come out, and they, for lack of a better word, they love their process. They think they do it best. They believe there are reasons for all parts of their permitting process, and that an automated process cannot possibly do what they do as sort of a live person. And so there's sort of like a fundamental ideological difference with some of these jurisdictions. Some of them, again, they just, they want their own. They don't want the state telling them what to do. But I will say in none of these cases did this actually take away fees from permitting jurisdictions. They can still charge their permitting fee. That's a whole other sort of issue. But frankly, most of the opposition we face are from authorities, which are often represented by Democrats in some of these states, which I think is why you see a lot more traction in some of these red states who have a long history of, I think, for better or worse, taking away authority from cities. And Democrats represent those cities, and they're sort of protecting their interests.
Yeah, it's
Not sure if
ironic.
you have anything.
Interesting lessons there.
It's mostly all local government bodies. In Illinois, there's some opposition. The strongest opposition is from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, which is it's the union of the solar companies, and this is cynical, but this is also partially what they've said. This legislation will essentially make the market more competitive, right? Right now, if you are a solar installer and you want to expand you are going, you want to expand into like a neighboring jurisdiction, you need to learn that jurisdiction's new rules and processes and requirements. Our legislation will standardize that. And it will make the market more competitive, which will drive down cost. And you can imagine that could be some interests that don't want that to happen. But for the most part, it's local government.
The entrenched people who've been doing it the way they've been doing it.
Exactly.
The particularized review question that we got from Ellen is, I mean, are there reasons why where the automated approach just isn't going to work, or not really?
Yeah, there's some very could be some very complicated solar systems that it doesn't make sense to do instant review. The legislation in the states doesn't require that a jurisdiction adopt a platform that can do instant review for 100% of projects. They just need to do instant review for most projects, and jurisdictions have some flexibility. If they think that there's some solar projects that are super complicated, if they want to have eyes on it, that's fine. But the reality is that most solar projects are getting more and more standardized, more and more like an appliance. The instant permitting for solar has been around since 2014. It's not, there's hundreds of jurisdictions across the country that are using it, representing 1/3 of the national market. So it's not, I think frequently the concerns that jurisdictions have that it's going to make the roof fall down or not is not founded.
And do you guys have model legislation or ordinances that jurisdictions can use to go forward with basic permitting?
Yep, we absolutely do. It's state legislation. It's not jurisdictions themselves, but we have models for all those sort of different policy options
Great.
that I laid out that we're happy to share.
Okay, Cindy had her hand raised. I don't know if Cindy, you can put your in the chat, or do you have something about instant permitting specifically?
No, I was going to ask, restate a question in the chat, whether there is some standard language that you're sharing from these states, and if you've got a group in Oregon that you're working with yet.
Yes to language, no to Oregon. I'm not sure.
Cindy, are you raising your hand?
About Oregon.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Cindy, are you
raising your hand?
Are you raising your hand? Are there groups?
I'm sorry, no, it hadn't come down.
No. I meant, like, are you interested in working on this in Oregon?
Yeah, probably next legislature, I'll definitely bring this to my team. We do climate legislation and related.
Well, Cindy, I will follow up with you since I'm our Western guy. Oregon.
Okay.
We're starting small and building out, so Oregon hasn't been sort of our initial top tier, but I think we're also opportunistic, and where there are partners who want to raise their hand and have a good champ, like we're here to help. So let's I can get your contact, or you can get mine.
Cindy, I just put Ben and Matt's emails in the chat too. So for you or anyone else who wants to reach them about this sort of thing, their emails are there.
Okay, I think it was to you next, Ben. I think you have to share your screen again. We lost it.
Oh. Really?
At least I can't see it. I'm not sure if other people can.
Do that again. Sorry about that. No, nothing?
Not yet.
I don't know where it went. Sorry, this is embarrassing. And now my computer's frozen.
Oh, no.
1 second. All right, here we go. All right,
Got it.
better?
Yep.
Okay.
Seeing your whole screen.
Yep. All right, are we on?
It's loading. There we go.
Okay, sorry about that.
No.
So in 2000 and in 21, we ran a campaign, and this was before we had launched Permit Power. I was with the California Solar and Storage Association. We ran legislation to require jurisdictions automate their solar permitting. There were a few different pieces, and I guess automate their residential solar permitting. A few different pieces. The biggest piece was, as I said, it mandated jurisdictions do this. It included solar plus storage systems. Solar batteries are very important because they allow people to power their homes with clean energy when the sun goes down. So it automated the permitting both for solar only systems and solar plus storage systems. The bill applied to cities with a population of more than 5,000 people and counties with a population of more than 150,000 people. And the largest cities and counties had a year to implement the bill or to come to compliance, and the smaller cities had 2 years. So that was one component. The second component was a reporting requirement to the state that the jurisdictions need to report when they're in compliance and how they're in compliance, and then that they also then need to report annually on the number of projects that are going through the automated instant system for its traditional review. And the third part was a grant program to help jurisdictions comply. I think Matt shared the gold standard for permitting solar app. The software designed by the Federal Department of Energy is free. So the grants were really just an incentive. In the first year, in 2021, the legislation, the grant program went through, and the mandate was held. And we went back in yes, that was 2021, and we went back in 2022, and were able to get the mandate through. I think there was, there was someone answering an earlier question. There was initial opposition from local government groups, but we took a series of amendments and they moved to neutral. And there was also bipartisan support, which was great because it is clean energy, but this is also touches upon things that Republicans traditionally find important, making government more efficient, and the idea that you can do what you want on your property without interference from the government. Matt, are you on this slide?
Nope.
Yeah, I think this is, yeah, we're talking about implementation here, so
Oh, great. Will.
I I can talk about that. So as this slide indicates, just because the law is on the books doesn't mean that there's going to be compliance. And for given the scope of the law, which is essentially every city and county in the state of California, it's probably doesn't shock the conscience that there were numerous jurisdictions that just didn't prioritize compliance with this statute the way that we expected and hoped they would. So in shaping the implementation campaign, it really we decided to not come out with guns blazing for those jurisdictions that were out of compliance, but try to approach it in a more collaborative way. But we saw quickly that the fact that our initial communications pointing out the non-compliance and asking for some information and offering assistance, the fact that they came from council, we think made a difference. We included, in most cases, we copied council from the outset on our initial communications. And we were able to take meetings with jurisdictions, by and large, when we wanted them. And so, we're able to sort of place jurisdictions into buckets in terms of the ones that were responsive, the ones that were burying their heads in the sand, and the ones that were dragging their feet but seemed to be headed in the right direction. At the same time, we were developing a litigation strategy, and we were helped by the fact that in California, there's and the litigators among us will be happy to nerd out on this, but there's public citizen standing in the state of California. So that gave us the option. So essentially, even nonprofits, nonprofit entities have standing to enforce state law in California under certain circumstances, which applied here. So we didn't need to go out and hunt up a plaintiff that was injured by a noncompliance because we had permit power, and they were going to be our plaintiff in the event we needed to pull the litigation trigger. We're also helped by the fact that there's a streamlined proceeding available in California. It's essentially a writ proceeding. You don't have to file a lawsuit. And the writ proceedings are fairly streamlined. You don't really do discovery in them. You go in, you make your filing, there's a response, and then you then you brief it and you get a hearing date. So also there's also a private attorney general attorney's fee statute in California. And we felt that that gave us quite a bit of leverage as well. So with those arrows in our quiver, we just proceeded on this course of reaching out to jurisdictions and assigning them priority based on what kind of responses we were receiving. And that process. We stood up the process and the procedures that we were using and the various spreadsheets, and the students in the clinic were all instrumental in that. They were very engaged in and very interested in how the negotiations went with the jurisdictions that we met with in that time. But unfortunately, the term of the semester came and went, and the project was not done. So the work continues. And we're still in the process of trying to corral outlier jurisdictions, and that work will continue for a time yet. But we're quite pleased with the progress that we made, and to date we haven't had to pull the litigation trigger. There's one or two candidates as we speak, but we haven't had to do that, and we haven't had to devote those resources to actual litigation at this point. Next slide. Okay, Ben, you want to address those first two, the education and grassroots?
So our compliance campaign had three prongs. Will touched upon the legal engagement, but just as helpful background, there was a strong education component here where jurisdictions just simply needed to know that they needed to comply with the law. So through the California Energy Commission, they did a blast to jurisdictions and called up jurisdictions. California building officials did a webinar. They did outreach to their members. League of Cities, Association of Counties, same thing. The second prong was grassroots engagement. There's an organization in California called Solar Rights Alliance. They're like the NRA, but for solar. So they have a large membership base of people who have solar on their roofs who take action. So they through their members have engaged 400 jurisdictions, getting their members to contact city council members or the mayor or the county supervisor and say, hey, this law is coming up. You should get into compliance, or once the compliance deadline has passed, hey, you're not in compliance, you should get into compliance. And they've been incredibly effective at moving a number of jurisdictions. I will say that it's for the grassroots engagement. This is they, they've moved hundreds of jurisdictions. It's also the comparatively lower hanging fruit. It's really interesting to see that in many cases, there's jurisdictions where like citizens, and it's unfortunate that this is the reality, but it is, where constituents like try to get traction and they don't. And then Will sends a letter, and Will, being an attorney, sends a letter to the city attorney, and then all of a sudden they start paying attention. So all three of these prongs have been very important. Will, back to you.
Yeah, can we see the next slide? Yeah, so I think Matt, you were going to make some remarks on this slide.
Yep. If we're done with the implementation work, I think we've talked to you all for a while, and so we want to have some more space for some question and dialogue. But we just wanted to make sure that we have some asks for you all, and if you want to get involved, and if you want to work in Oregon, Cindy, or however you want to do it. But these are sort of the three buckets of, at Permit Power, we're a small team. We're currently 5 people. We're about to be 6. And there's a lot more that we could be doing with more capacity, right? And Will has been such a value add and just sort of shows how I think this partnership can work very well. So the buckets of work here are the sort of the ongoing implementation work that continues in California. As Will said, we're sort of nearing an end game there, but there is still some work to do to sort of get to our goal. There also will likely be work to do pretty soon in Maryland. The Maryland legislation passed last year, and the compliance deadline is this August 1st. The bill has some challenges with it, so we might need to fix it, but compliance is going to be pretty low there. I think we'll get to about 50% of the population covered by the compliance deadline, but that's only 50% of the population covered, and that is with a grassroots effort that we're working with Sierra Club right now. However, I think then we will be pivoting to more of a legal strategy there, since, as Ben said, once the lawyers start writing, I think things change a little bit for some city officials. So that's the implementation work, and then also depending on what states we win in this year, we will be following up, and our implementation work will expand into any number of states, likely New Jersey, likely Texas, potentially Illinois, potentially Arizona, so potentially Florida. So we'll be seeing what happens there. That's the first bucket. Second bucket is legal research. So Ben is our chief of policy. He just hired a research director. So we have a little bit of internal capacity, but our needs that we run into across the country are great. The issues we see coming up in states over and over, and those sort of research needs, things like, again, who has standing to sue in what states. Some of our bills have private rights to action, some don't. Are there things, some states we've considered, which of our policy goals could we achieve through executive order? That's possible in some states, it's not possible in other states. So being able to navigate that as we are sort of making our priorities. Things like how local jurisdictions comply with FEMA's flood insurance requirements, since some consider solar a major upgrade to a home, which triggers a whole series of needed upgrades to comply with FEMA flood insurance. So there's all these questions that come up regularly, and we have a long list, and we can share them with you. But if you're interested, if you have time, capacity, we love all the research help we can get. And then finally, we're looking to really expand our network. Again, I think our partnership with Will has been so successful, but we do view like a much greater legal network here is needed, and you all are an army of lawyers here, and that means your own time. That means connections to pro bono law firms that might be able to help. That means connections to law clinics, and all of that sort of in service of these first two, in service of the actual implementation work, and in service of some like deeper dive legal questions. So I think I'll just pause there. And again, our at least Ben and my emails were dropped into the chat earlier. I think you should reach out to Will, Ben, myself, if you're interested in getting more involved, and we will take all the help we can have. And with that,
if I can just elaborate on a couple of those points, Matt. So I just want to stress the bang for the buck aspect of this. So there's a fair amount of time and effort that went into developing our system in identifying outliers and identifying the course of correspondence and with all of the jurisdictions. But once that's up and running, it really was satisfying to see that the great majority of jurisdictions were quite responsive. And when you think about it, many of these jurisdictions, they're smaller counties, smaller cities. They don't have huge staffs. They have all sorts of priorities, and things tend to get, deferred and delayed. And we all know when it comes to climate matters, that's not a good thing. We're all in a battle against the time here, and that just was unacceptable to have jurisdictions that were essentially ignoring the law. And following engagement with us, we felt that they were no longer ignoring it. There were a few jurisdictions that simply were not aware of what their responsibilities were. And I think we really turned around a number of jurisdictions with really minimal effort with regard to a given jurisdiction. So I think there was a lot of a bang for the buck, and that's a satisfying way to do pro bono work. Um, you know, and it can take all forms. It doesn't even have to be direct engagement. I mean, some of the support work is legal research related, as Matt had mentioned, and there's stuff that you don't really anticipate coming up. I mean, you read the statutes in there, and thanks to the efforts of Ben and others, the statutes seem very clear and straightforward. But there's always issues that come up with jurisdictions that try to sort of circumvent some of the requirements by adding on requirements for that don't necessarily relate to the initial issuance of the permit, but may delay the project because of additional inspections or other tangential requirements that are added even after the permit is issued. And the legal question is, at what point have they violated the spirit, if not the letter, but more the letter of the law, by engaging in these sort of workarounds, obstacles, if you will, that delay the actual onset of the project, which is what this is all about, is getting that done. So, the work remains to be done in California, as Matt mentioned. If anyone wants to talk about that specifically, and in working together to bring this home, my information, feel free to reach out to me directly. I think my information's in the chat as well, and I'd be happy to respond to anybody who's curious about that. Another additional point is that we on the coordinating committee are in the process of exploring other opportunities to work with law school clinics. So if you're interested in potentially working with a clinic, just keep an eye on the Third Act Lawyers website, where we'll keep our members apprised of opportunities as we learn of them. And I highly encourage anybody to jump on an opportunity if you see one, because it's really great work.
Well, can we go to some Q&A while we still have time left?
Yeah, go for it.
Thanks. Just a couple more practical questions. Peter asked, is there a way for the research piece to get access to Lexis or Westlaw? I don't know. We don't have that capability for Third Act Lawyers, but I don't know. Do you guys have any access to how are you doing your current research?
Yeah, I think the answer is no in terms of access to Westlaw or Lexis. I've got some personal resources there that I've tapped into, but it wouldn't be relevant for others.
Okay. The other is malpractice coverage, which is another issue that we Pat asked about, that that can be a some of the things you're talking about are not really the type of legal representation that I think where that would be an issue. But Will, have you addressed that issue in your work?
Yeah, and you're right, Mark. It certainly becomes more of an issue if you talk about, filing a lawsuit or in this case a writ petition. But in my personal case, again, I have some coverage available through my former firm that as a retired partner, I'm entitled to do pro bono work and get coverage for that. But I do want to mention that in exploring some options for malpractice coverage, uh, people should take note of this because I was very surprised to learn it, at least in California, that if you are, as a retired lawyer, if you're interested in doing pro bono work only, that the malpractice, you can get decent malpractice coverage for a very affordable rate. And if you have those circumstances where you see yourself only doing pro bono work, I'd highly encourage you to check with a broker in your state and see what the costs are if you see malpractice as being an impediment to doing the work.
Thanks. I have just a question about the implementation. It seems like it's sort of whack-a-mole in California, going after these municipalities and jurisdictions to see whether they're complying with a state mandate. Is that worse in a state like California, which is, a regulatory friendly state, and you've got more power in the local municipalities when it comes to regulation and permitting than you'd have in a Texas, for example? Or it just seems like is there a more efficient way to drive forward a state law, for that matter, that's meant to accelerate permitting without having to just go chase each town, each municipality down and monitor and drive compliance that way?
Well, let me make a brief response to that, and Ben might have some thoughts on it as well. But because we're dealing with essentially building code regulations and building permits, it's by definition highly localized. And I don't think I can't, from where I sit, I can't conceive of a way to do that on a statewide basis. Ben, do you have any thoughts on that?
Mark, you're asking a little bit of an existential question for me.
Huh.
There's a number of protections in California, of solar protections in California, from local jurisdictions. There's caps on permitting fees. There's a rule that says jurisdictions can't take into account aesthetics when permitting solar projects. They can just do look at building and safety. And there's 540 cities and counties across California, and they violate these laws all the time. And it's like trying to stop them is like a whack-a-mole approach. HOAs too. HOAs put up insane barriers to solar, and there's protections in statute, and I don't know how many hundreds of HOAs there are across the state, but it's the same thing. The models, there are different models. The legislation that we're pursuing in New Jersey directs the state to adopt an instant permitting platform that contractors can use. So it bypasses the local, it's a little more nuanced in New Jersey, but it bypasses that problem. In the red states, the model is a little different, and it just allows solar installers to go right to the third party. In Germany, you don't even need to apply for a permit. If you're a qualified installer, you just send notification that you're building the thing. There's hundreds of jurisdictions across the country that don't require solar permits either. In Vermont, there's 2 jurisdictions that require permits, the rest don't. So I think there's other models. I think the status quo is just really, really entrenched, and local control is really strong. But it's interesting seeing what's happening, and we're learning as we go partially, to be candid. It's really interesting seeing what's happening in New Jersey, where the opposition is not from, there's no formal opposition to the bill in New Jersey, but the behind the scenes opposition is the state agency that doesn't want to have to implement it. So I don't know if you have any ideas, Mark,
But
all ears.
Well, Mark, one thing I would add is you could include penalties in legislation, right, for jurisdictions that don't comply. That is something that we don't do as often because that makes the bill that much harder to pass, right? And I think that already we face pretty fierce opposition from some jurisdictions, and that just makes it more so. But I mean, as Ben said, this is sort of an iterative, ongoing process, and there's always going to be new ways to force people with a stick.
Thank you.
Listen, before we sign off, I just wanted to make one more sort of PSA here for us, and it's germane in talking about some of the malpractice issues and getting pro bono work done as a retired lawyer. So we're planning an upcoming webinar, likely in June or July, with an organization called Lawyers for Good Government. I think Pat mentioned them earlier. They have some very exciting initiatives that make it easier for retired lawyers to get involved in litigation and other pro bono work on a case-by-case basis with malpractice coverage, as well as other administrative and other support. So very exciting potential opportunities there. We'll be announcing the webinar details soon and hope that everybody will be able to attend.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank all of our participants tonight, Ben, Matt, Will, Mark. Thanks very much for what I found to be a really fascinating presentation. We'll get the slides from you guys and we'll share those along with the recording in the next couple of days here. And please, the chat will be part of that email, but it's probably a good idea if you want to refer to any of this information immediately. It's a good idea for you to save the chat now so you've got it and you don't have to wait for us to send it back to you. So with that, thanks again, everybody, for being here tonight. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Will, especially. And we'll see you next time.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you.